Hey everybody, hope you're doing good today. Neil the Knife Guy here. I recently traded my Zero Tolerance 0350 for this Domino by Spyderco. Really been loving this knife. I did this trade on a Facebook group called Knife Traders. If you haven't heard of the group, go on, check them out. You can find a lot of good deals on there, and there's a lot of good, respectable people who frequent that group and put up a lot of great knives. The guy I traded for said this knife was new in box, and he wasn't lying. There's no marks on the blade whatsoever, no scratches on the pocket clip at all. The actual sharpness of this knife is still factory edge, so it does shave hair off your arm, and I could tell it hasn't been sharpened. The point you could see is still very crisp and very pointy. So I was very happy with the trade, and also was he. Had this knife for about 2-3 days now, and really enjoy it. The flipping action is awesome. No matter how you flip it, you could light switch it, it comes out. You could push button and it comes out. You could even just slap the friggin' flipper and it flips. But not only that, the way this thing is designed, you could open it with your thumb or Spidey flick it with ease also. One of the things I thought strange about this was the hole placement. So you can see here how the hole is set back from the finger choil. It's sort of not centered like a lot of Spydercos are. Just show you the Sage 1 here for an example. You can see it's almost right in the middle of that finger choil. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, if this was centered the way the Sage 1 here is, the flipper tab would get in the way if you do open it. So you can see here it's hitting my finger. And same sort of with Spidey flicking. But if you're opening it just like the regular style, that flipper tab would actually interfere with your index finger. Setting it back like this, you could flip it no problem, and you don't have to worry about that flipper tab hitting your finger. So it's a really great design. All the torque screws on this are one size, which I also really like. So the pivot screws and all the body screws are a T9 torque screw. Really beefy screws, and this knife is really well put together like most Taichung Spydercos are. No blade play, perfect lockup. And did a couple pictures on Instagram taking this knife apart and putting it back together. It's put together very well. There's small little pins that hold the scales in place. So when you take this knife apart and put it back together, you don't have to do any of those little tricks you do to actually get the blade centered. You can see here this knife is perfectly centered. Don't really do a lot of frame lock knives. My preference is liner locks. I know a lot of people argue that frame locks are stronger. I just don't really believe that. Liner locks don't have a weak point in them built in inherently, and in my opinion frame locks do. You can see down here where they make the relief cut so you can actually get spring tension onto the frame lock. And that cutout here is thinner than any part of this liner lock. But for someone like me who doesn't rely on a lock to keep the knife open, I pretty much use knives as you're supposed to. I'm not a tactical operator or anything like that where I'm prying open doors or doing any of that crazy stuff that a lot of people sort of imagine themselves doing. I've never run into a situation I couldn't handle with a knife like this. Carving wood, doing a lot of heavy use with these things, even splitting minor kindling to do little hobo stove fires. I've never had a problem with a frame lock or a liner lock. Not really one to believe one is stronger or weaker than the other. They're pretty much the same strength. The only thing you could actually argue is when you're holding a frame lock, the hand pressure you're putting on this is actually keeping that lock in place if it does want to slip. That being said, this knife is quickly becoming one of my favorites. Overall size is really great. Right in that sort of comfort range that I like to carry. Don't mind carrying larger or heavier knives, as you guys pretty well know, but I tend to use smaller knives more. I'd consider this in between a small and medium knife for me. Small would be sort of in the Sage range here. Medium would be the Mannix. And then from there up, I would consider any knife sort of a large size knife. Sort of a large size knife for me is like 4-inch blade or bigger. Small knives are 3-inch and smaller for me, and anywhere in between there is a medium knife. So that's how I get my sort of size comparisons going. You can see here, if I put these in order of size, the Domino sits right in between the size of a Sage 1 and a Mannix 2. And same with the Delica, it's smaller than both of these. Just to give you another size comparison of this knife, I'll just put it next to a Bic lighter. A lot of people know the size of an actual Bic lighter, and I've done this a lot in older videos, and I think I'm going to continue to do it in my newer ones too. So you can see it's a good size comparison because we all know what these lighters' sizes are. The operation of this knife, like I stated on briefly, is very smooth, very easy to operate no matter how you want to open it. Spidey flick, thumb flick, and then mostly the flipper I use. The titanium on the back here has a really nice finish to it. It's a stonewash finish, I think, so it's going to hide scratches really well. You can see the sort of glistening parts where the actual stones have sort of polished or marred up the surface. It's really nice looking. The flipper tab is nicely smoothed out, so there's no sharp ridges. A lot of Taichung Spydercos come with sharp edges and all that sort of stuff. If you have a Taichung Spyderco, you know what I'm talking about there. But on this one, it's actually pretty subdued compared to a lot of them. I know on my Spyderco Volatin, there's a couple sharper edges on there that I could do without. Same with the Sage here. The spine is quite sharp. Not like cut you sharp, but sort of if you scrape your nail on it, it'll sort of take off bits of your nail. And then this is sort of sharp here. I tend to like it, so you could actually get a better grip on it. It sort of bites into your finger and you could actually flick it out. So I've never really minded that sharpness, but it's not really necessary to actually get the blade out. Overall, this is a good knife. Rock solid lockup, rock solid build quality. You just sort of have to keep your fingers off the lock bar, like every frame lock flipper. If you put pressure on that lock bar and go to flip it, didn't there, but if you do put pressure on that lock bar and go to flip it, it tends to sort of slow down the blade. You can see there how it didn't open. I was putting actually a lot of pressure on that lock bar. So this one, you don't have to be as mindful as a lot of frame lock flippers as keeping your fingers off that. But generally, you could flip this knife out all day long and it'll come out every time. When I took this apart, you could actually take out the lanyard hole. You don't have to have that in there. And this does have a steel insert, so it's not titanium on steel wearing away on you. And I do like that, so if I ever run into a problem with this locking up to 100%, touching the other liner, I could send this back to Spyderco and they'll put in another lock bar insert. The lock bar insert also acts as an over travel stop, so you won't be bending that titanium frame out to where it loses its spring tension. This knife has good lock bar memory, so what I mean by that is you could lock this up very slowly and it'll lock up in the same position as if you actually flicked it out hard. which I like. Centering, all that stuff you'd come to expect from a Spyderco that's made in Taichung, Taiwan, is perfect. There's no problems with that. So one thing that's new to me for this knife is the actual blade steel. I haven't owned a knife in Cts-xhp before, and the next part of this video is going to be an actual sort of edge retention test. So I'm going to do a few cuts through cardboard, try to do as many as possible and see how the edge holds up, because right now this will take hair off my arm. So stay tuned for that. So guys, I actually switched the camera around so you could actually see what I'm doing as a test. I'm going to be making a few cuts through different types of cardboard and seeing how this Cts-xhp by Spyderco does. Just show you right quick that it can take hair off my arm. You can see that there. And just slice some foam book paper to show you the sharpness also. Very sharp. Not having any problems with it. So, getting to it, I got a couple different kinds of cardboard, just this thicker, sort of non-corrugated stuff. This is actually quite tough to carve through, and then just some regular standard single ply sort of cardboard here. So I'm going to try as many cuts as possible with this, maybe just make this a more manageable size. And just get to it. So I'll just start out with this small piece here. You can tell already that this is a really nice grind for slicing. Thin behind the edge, and the blade actual stock isn't too thick. So I'm not really going to count how many cuts I make. If you guys want to do that on your own, you can. But I'm going to try to get as many as I can through the limited amount of cardboard I do have. I'm also going to try to use the entire blade length, so it doesn't just get worn in one spot, and give you an overall better judge of how it cuts. Not having to put too much force into these cuts, it's pretty effortless. As I get down to smaller pieces, it's going to be tougher to hold on to. Maybe just try a little paper cut right now, see where we're at. Doesn't feel like it's affected at all. I can tell you right now, if this was S30V, it would be having a little bit tougher time slicing through phone book paper. But right now, this Cts-xhp is still very sharp and still taking hair off, no problem. Just get rid of this small piece. When I'm doing this, I'm going to be holding it in different positions, so in the far back position and in the forward choil here. Maybe just do some cuts like that. Really effortless cutting on this, guys. That's why I really like Spyderco knives. They seem to be performance-based rather than trend-based. You can just see, I mean, I'll try it with a couple fingers, see what happens. That's an actual bigger piece I could use right there. So very, very nice. I sort of saved this knife for today so I could actually do this test without having sort of hard use this knife before I did this. You can see a little bit of gunk on the blade. I kept this knife in sort of the condition I received it, which was out of box new, just so I could actually do this sort of test on camera. So we're finding out together how this Cts-xhp does, because I have no previous experience with it at all. Holy Christ. It's a very nice slicing knife, this is. Trying to go as thin as possible so I could get as many cuts as possible. Like I said in the start of the video, maybe I said it, maybe I didn't, this is supposed to be a sort of D2 equivalent steel, but more stainless, and if that happens to be true, this will probably be one of my favorite blade steels, because right now D2 is one of my favorite blade steels for the ease of sharpening and for the edge retention it does give you, and it's really a tough steel, D2 is. And if this happens to be a more stainless version of that, or equivalent, that's going to be one of my favorite steels. So, go back to some foam book paper here. Make sure it's just one sheet. Still absolutely no problem. And I know for a fact right now that if this was like S30V, it would not take any hair off my arm. S30V tends to lose its razor sort of hair popping sharpness pretty quickly. And this right now, I'm running out of hair, is still taking hair off, but not as much as in the beginning of the test. Still feels really sharp. And it is still taking hair off. Move on to this sort of tougher cardboard. And even this is fairly easy to slice through. Definitely more resistance in this sort of board type cardboard than your regular corrugated cardboard. But it's handling it no problem. Go back to the paper again. So yeah, that seemed to have affected it a little bit, but not much. Still push cuts. Let's try the old. Still does want a push cut. So far I'm actually quite impressed with this steel, guys. Actually, let me sort of get some of this crap off here. There is a little bit of tape residue on here. Just going to get that off. Yeah, so I think it was more the tape affecting, the tape sort of gum you get from cardboard affecting it than anything else. It's not as sharp as it was in the beginning of this test, but it's not dull by any means. And you can see just by the phone book paper, it's not having any problem whatsoever. Do a couple slow cuts. Very nice. So my impressions overall of Cts-xhp is really high right now. I could tell already that this is going to hold an edge quite well. Don't know how it is going to be for sharpening. We'll find that out at a later date. But right now I gotta say I really like this steel. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to be doing some more of this type of testing in the near future. Just show you the cardboard pile I'm left with. My cat's in love with this cardboard pile. So that's a fair amount of cuts. And to still have the same sort of sharpness as this is quite awesome. So thanks for watching, guys, and stay tuned for more.